A minister was speaking to the Sunday school about the things money cannot buy. Money can't buy laughter, and it can't buy love, he told them. Driving his point home, he said, "What would you do if I offered you $1,000 not to love your mom and dad?" The children were silent. Finally, a small voice asked, "How much would you give me not to love my big sister?" It's not always easy loving our family members. As someone has said, home is the place where you can say whatever you want. No one will be listening to you anyway. Family life teaches you loyalty, patience, understanding, perseverance, and a lot of other things you wouldn't need if you'd stayed single. George Burns said, "Happiness is having a large, loving, caring, close-knit family in another city." Seriously, family is important. In the Ten Commandments, we read, "Honor your father and your mother so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you." A natural reading of the New Testament suggests that Jesus was Mary's firstborn child and that she and Joseph had other sons and daughters. Jesus' brothers are listed by name: James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon. His sisters are mentioned, but not by name. As the firstborn son, Jesus would have had responsibility for his mother upon his father Joseph's death. Most people assume that Mary is a widow at this point in the gospel story. The last time Joseph was mentioned was in Luke's gospel when Jesus was 12 years old and the whole family went down to Jerusalem. That was about 20 years or so before Jesus' crucifixion. As a widow, Mary would have had a very difficult life. Widows were especially vulnerable in the ancient world. There was no social security, no pensions. In that patriarchal world, if a man brought a case against a widow in court, she would often lose everything. The odds were against her. That is what Jesus was referring to when he accused the scribes of devouring widows' houses. Many widows were taken advantage of. If a widow was not taken in by her family, she could easily die on the streets. Widows were often homeless and penniless. Although widows and widowers are better off today, the elderly are still taken advantage of. They are targets of scams, identity theft. Unfortunately, elder abuse is a tragic reality. However, the early church pooled its resources to take care of widows. In his first letter to Timothy, Paul addresses the problem of having too many needy widows that the church was trying to take care of. He tells Timothy, "Take care of widows who are truly needy, but if a particular widow has children or grandchildren, they should first learn to respect their own family and repay their parents, because this pleases God. Teach these things so that the families will be without fault. But if someone doesn't provide for their own relatives, and especially for their immediate family, they have denied the faith. They are worse than those who have no faith." The family was important to Jesus and to early Christians. Jesus took the Pharisees to task for coming up with loopholes so they would not have to provide for their elderly parents. Jesus called them hypocrites. They were sidestepping the obligation to honor and care for their parents. As Jesus was dying, he wanted to make certain his mother was cared for. So he said to his best friend John, "Here's your mother." John did what Jesus asked. The text says, and from that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Like the Pharisees, not everyone cares for their family. Not taking care of one's family is still common. A mother sits in a nursing home, never visited by a son or daughter or a grandchild. An elderly person has to choose between groceries or medicines when they have family who could help. The kids don't come around until after the hearse has pulled away. Then they descend like vultures, fighting each other over the scraps that their parents have left. We need to take care of those related to us. especially the most vulnerable, children, and the elderly. As followers of Jesus, we have a special responsibility to our relatives. In the e-news, I mentioned Andy Roman, one of our young people. He has gone to Europe to help his relatives and others as they escape from Ukraine. I know his family is proud of him for being willing to take risks, to provide for their safety, and to assist them in finding places to live. Family is important. Jesus said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." Why doesn't Jesus use their names? We know Mary's name. It is Miriam in Hebrew, the name of Moses' sister, a very popular name in Jesus' time. There appear to be 7 different women in the New Testament who are named Mary. Who is the disciple whom Jesus loved? I've been calling him John, which is the most common interpretation. John was one of the 12. In the first 3 Gospels, he's part of Jesus' inner circle of friends, Peter, James, and John. In John's Gospel, he is called the disciple whom Jesus loved. In other words, Jesus' best friend. But why does the Gospel writer omit Mary and John's names in this saying from the cross? To Mom, "Woman, here's your son." To his friend, "Here's your mother." Are they unnamed so we can hear Jesus creating relationships among his disciples even today? Was Jesus' dying wish to establish a new family, a new community? Of course, he has been doing that with all the women and men who have been following him from the beginning. According to Mark's gospel, Mary had not originally been one of Jesus' disciples. His family thought he was crazy. In chapter 3 of Mark, we read, "When his family heard it, they went out to restrain him, for people were saying, 'He has gone out of his mind.' When Mary and Jesus' brothers came to him, Jesus wanted nothing to do with them. The text says, when his mother and his brothers came and standing outside, they sent to him and called him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they said to him, 'Your mother and your brothers and sisters are outside asking for you.' And he replied, 'Who are my mother and my brothers?' And looking at those who sat around him, he said, 'Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and my sister and my mother.'" Families have their problems. Even Jesus' family had its problems. It's often difficult to unite families. Ron Alexander wrote in the New York Times, "An older friend recently returned from her hometown in North Carolina. She says that they've spruced up the churchyard cemetery since her last visit several years back. Lots of new greenery," she said, "and families are together now." "Together?" I asked, puzzled. "Well, years ago, they never worried much about where they buried someone because everyone was a neighbor anyhow. They'd just dig a grave wherever it seemed to balance things, but they've redone it. So people are with their children and grandchildren instead of being scattered." "You mean they exhumed those bodies and reburied them?" "Oh, no," she said. "They just shifted the headstones. Everyone agrees it looks ever so much nicer." Jesus' family was not together regarding his ministry. However, at the crucifixion in John's gospel, Mary was there with the other disciples. Had she and her sister become followers of Jesus? Jesus' brothers still had not become part of Jesus' new family. They were not there when their brother Jesus died on a cross. They did not believe in him, but remained in Galilee. Jesus expanded his definition of family to include all those willing to follow him as their teacher, Lord, and Savior. The family circle for us as Christians is drawn much wider than our blood relatives. By Jesus forming this bond between his mother and his friend, he was showing that family is not just blood relatives, but those who care for each other. Most of us have experienced the love of God through the love of the family in the church. Fellow Christians have been there for us. At happy times when a baby is born, a son graduates, or a daughter gets married. At anxious times, when you wait together in a surgical waiting room, at traumatic times when the call comes about an accident, at sad times when a loved one dies. So when I've heard so many times people say, Pastor, I don't know what I would have done without my church family. We are there for each other. At the cross, Mary's heart was broken. The prophecy of Simeon that her soul would be pierced was fulfilled as she watched in horror. Her son died in agony before her eyes. However, Mary, the mother of Jesus, did not stand by herself. Her sister was there. Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene were by her side, as was Jesus' disciple and friend John. God never intended for us to endure grief by ourselves. They all needed to support each other as they watched their teacher, Lord, and friend suffer and die. Jesus fulfills his last human responsibility when he commits the care of his mother Mary to his closest friend John. John also benefits. Tradition tells us that John was the youngest of the 12 disciples. Jesus is giving Mary another son, and John now has a mother to care for him. Mary's gift to Jesus and the church for all centuries was that of mothering. It is a gift that is greatly needed in our world today. Mothering is one of the highest callings in all the world. There was a woman in New York City several decades ago who was upset by all the young babies being born to crack and heroin addicts, children who would never have loving arms and hands to surround them and guide them through their introduction to the world. This woman had one gift that she was able to give these children. She could not give them money, social status, or educational background, but she could be a mother to them. After she turned 65 and retired from custodial work, she began taking babies addicted to various substances and unwanted babies into her home. Eventually, she found couples to adopt them. It is estimated that she took in more than 1,000 babies before she died at the age of 87. Some of you may remember that President Ronald Reagan was so moved by her witness of compassion and care that he introduced her to a joint session of Congress. They called her Mother Hale. They had her funeral service at the famous Riverside Church in New York City. The gathering of more than 2,000 persons included street people, addicts, CEOs of major corporations, the mayor, the governor, priests, rabbis, and many more people from all walks of life. They came to pay their respects to this saint of God who touched the world with the simple gift of mothering. So it is no surprise that in a tender act of love and compassion, Jesus would care for the future needs of the woman who had shared God's gift of mothering with him. This is Women's History Month, and all of us owe a great debt to the mothers who bore us and the women who mothered us. Mothering means caring and nurturing, which is sometimes done by men, but for many of us, it has been the women in our lives who have been there for us. In the great film production, Jesus of Nazareth, we see Mary, Jesus' mother, pushing her way nearer the cross, but a line of guards stops her. She pleads, "I am his mother, please let me through." The sergeant inquires, "How can you prove it?" Suddenly the centurion, whose servant Jesus had healed earlier, appears. He is shocked at what is happening. He orders, "Let these women through. She is his mother." Yet when Mary Magdalene comes forward, he looks at her with uncertainty and questions, "Who are you?" "I'm one of the family," she says. The centurion looks at the mother of Jesus and asks, "Is that right?" She looks at Mary of Magdala, whom she has never seen before. "Yes," she says, "she belongs to us." When Jesus connects Mary and John as mother and son, Jesus is saying to all of us, You are my new family. You belong to each other. Take care of each other. Thanks be to God. Amen.